Hello, welcome to a demonstration on how you can use SUMIF and SUMIFS. Sounds about the same thing, but the main difference is that SUMIFS is actually a more modern function of SUMIF. So for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to use both of them so that you can actually see what's the difference, what the main differences are between the two of them, but they're pretty similar in their functionality. And when you're actually done observing this, I'm sure you'll be able to make your decision whether you want to stick with SUMIF or you can move over to SUMIFS, because they all function exactly the same way. So what I have here, I've got some store and regional sales data that I actually want to analyze here or to summarize. So I begin by looking at the total revenue by store, then I move on to region, then I move on by month, move on by product down there. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin using the function for SUMIF. So again, SUMIF in Excel, you enter the equal sign and then you type in SUMIF, and of course SUMIF will show up here. Okay, and once you've done that, you can go ahead and it will actually ask you for the range, right? The range in which you actually want to look up this particular value, right? So the range is going to be the store number. So you can just use the column letter as a selector. That way you're just selecting the entire column, right? Then you put in a comma, and then you select what your criteria is. It's this value that you want to look up in this particular range, comma, and then we want to summarize, to do a summary of this total weekly revenue, like that. Then closing parentheses, you press enter, and before you know it, we've actually generated that. And then all we have to do is we just copy the same formula downwards, so we don't have to repeat that. Okay, so we're moving on to the region. Again, we're still using SUMIF. Okay, and again, this is the region, so this is the column where the regions are, comma, and then we specify what our criteria is going to be. We want to look up this value, comma, and then of course we want the summary of the total weekly, closing parentheses, right? And once we've done that, as we did on the previous one, we just use our fill handle to copy, right? So we're moving on to SUMIF using the months. There are only 3 months available on that. So again, in which range the months are in this column, comma, and what criteria. We begin with October, comma, and then now we click on the total weekly revenue and closing parentheses. And once again, we just copy that formula, right? Sure, you're already appreciating how quickly we're actually able to do this, right? And then we go for range. This is actually product description, so it's here, comma, and then we'll be looking up this value, and then of course the sum of range would be that, closing parenthesis. Okay, then we copy that. Now we're moving over now to use the SUMIFS, right? As you noticed when we're typing SUMIF and SUMIFS was also showing up, so double click on SUMIF. Now what happens with SUMIF is that it's saying what is the sum range, the range from which you want to add up the values. It's going to be this, so it's going to be a little bit different. And then it's saying what is the criteria range, right? The range from which you want to look up these values, the store numbers. So it's actually going to be this one here, comma, and then what is your criteria is this value that must be looked for, closing parentheses, right? So you can see that there are fewer steps when you actually use SUMIFs, and it gives exactly the same values. All right, so I'm sure you will get the hang of it as we continue to do the next section. SUMIFs again, what's the sum range? It's this one here, comma, and where are we going to select this criteria from? Is the regions, comma, and then we select the actual criteria that we want to look up. Okay, and again, do exactly the same thing. Well, we need to format this a little bit. Good. Okay, now moving on to the maths. SUMIFS. And again, sum of the range, comma. And then, of course, where we're looking up the months is actually in this column here, comma, and which criteria we're going to be using is the sell by month. Closing parenthesis, and before you know it, this section is done. Of course, formatting is always very important. And then finally, we take a look at by sales by item, right? So again, SUMIFS. Right, so it feels a little bit different, right? The method when you're using SUMIFS. SUMIFS is actually, it's a much quicker way. You've got fewer specifications that you're actually having to use, right? And you know, you be the judge and see which one seems to make more sense to you. All right. Okay, but of course, you need to appreciate that the SUMIFS actually came later, right? SUMIF is what we used to have traditionally. So this is actually an advancement, and probably maybe you may find SUMIFS a little more easy to understand, because basically it begins by asking you where are the values that you want to add up, right? So you specify them. They say okay. But it's going to be based on what criteria, right? Which column is containing the values that you need for your criteria. Then you specify it, and then once you've done that, then you now specify the specific criteria you want to look up, which should be added up, right? Now, when you actually look at the SUMIF itself, it does it slightly differently, right? It actually says, okay, you tell me where is the range where we are going to look up the value that we are to use as a criteria. We specify it, and then we say, okay, but where are the values that you actually want to use? And then, of course, specify the criteria that you want to be looked up, based on which the values will be added up. Right, so in a way, there's still a three-step process, right? And between the two, hopefully you may find one that tells a much clearer story than the other. And you know, then just be the judge. But in my case, I'm pretty comfortable with both, all right? But I can also see how it's a lot easier to interpret the SUMIFS more than the SUMIF, all right? But now for me, I'm a little bit biased because I've actually used SUMIF for a very long time, and I've actually found a way of telling a story while I'm actually constructing that particular formula. So again, it all depends on your personal preference. And again, just be sure to test it out and see which one seems to make more sense to you. Otherwise, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching. And again, remember to like, share, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much, and bye for now.